Welcome back, truth seekers. Tonight we're going deeper into another mind mystery, one that might change the way you see the world. Picture this. You're trudging through the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains in 1959. The snow crunches beneath your boots, each step echoing in the deadly silence. Your breath forms clouds in the minus 25-degree air as you approach what should be a simple camping site. But what you find stops you cold. There's a tent, half collapsed and buried in snow. It's been slashed open from the inside, not torn by wind or claws, but deliberately cut with a knife. All the gear is still there. Boots lined up neatly, warm clothes folded, maps spread out for route planning, even a half-eaten meal sitting on a plate as if someone had just stepped away for a moment. But there's no sign of the 9 young hikers who were supposed to be inside. Their footprints lead away from the tent into the brutal Russian winter. Most of them are barefoot. The temperature, minus 25 degrees Celsius. That's about minus 13 Fahrenheit. Cold enough to kill you in minutes. What could possibly make 9 experienced mountaineers cut their way out of their own tent and run into a deadly blizzard wearing nothing but their underwear? This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. And after more than 60 years, it's still one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in modern history. Let me take you back to January 1959. The Soviet Union is gripped by Cold War paranoia. But for 9 university students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, the biggest concern is packing enough warm socks for their winter hiking expedition. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student with a passion for the mountains. He wasn't just experienced, he was obsessed. Friends described him as the kind of guy who'd rather spend his weekends battling frostbite than sitting in a warm cafe. He'd planned this route himself, mapping out a challenging but manageable trek through the northern Urals. The group was tight-knit, all in their early 20s, all skilled outdoorsmen and women, all excited about their adventure through what the locals ominously called Dead Mountain. The name alone should have been a red flag, but young people have a way of finding death omens charming rather than concerning. They even had their own expedition newspaper, a handwritten journal where they joked about yetis hiding in the forests and drew cartoons of themselves as intrepid explorers. Dark humor that would haunt investigators later when they found these cheerful sketches among the frozen remains of the camp. The plan was straightforward, a challenging but routine ski trek that would earn them a level 3 hiking certification. They were supposed to return by February 12th, 1959. When they didn't show up, friends and family initially weren't too worried. Mountain expeditions run late all the time, right? But days turned into weeks. Finally, on February 20th, a search party was launched. What they found on February 26th was like something out of a nightmare. The searchers had been hiking for hours when they spotted something orange against the white snow. As they got closer, they realized it was the tent, partially collapsed, covered in a thick layer of snow, looking like it had been abandoned for weeks. But here's what made their blood run cold. The tent was still standing. If there had been an avalanche, it would have been completely buried or swept away. Instead, it sat there on the slope like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. Inside, everything was eerily normal. Food laid out, as if for dinner, canned meat, crackers, even some precious chocolate, saved for the celebration of reaching their destination. Maps folded neatly on sleeping bags, boots and clothing arranged as though the hikers had just stepped out for a moment to answer nature's call. But then the searchers noticed the cuts, long, deliberate slashes in the tent fabric, not torn by wind or animal claws, cut with a knife by someone who was inside, desperately trying to get out. Think about that for a second. These weren't accidental damage. Someone had taken the time to slice through their own shelter, the one thing keeping them alive in the wilderness. 9 sets of footprints led away from the tent toward the tree line about a mile downhill. Most were barefoot or in socks. Some showed signs of socks that had been torn to shreds by the frozen ground. In the middle of a Siberian winter where the snow was hip-deep and the wind could strip flesh from bone, what would make you abandon your shelter, your warm clothes, your boots, and run into a blizzard that could kill you in minutes? The searchers followed the trail downhill, their hearts sinking with each step. What they found next was even more disturbing. The first 2 bodies were discovered near the tree line. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both found in their underwear near the remains of a small fire. They died of hypothermia, but they'd fought hard against the cold. Here's the detail that made investigators' blood run cold. Both had bitten through the flesh on their own hands, apparently trying to use pain to stay conscious as they froze. Doroshenko's fingertips were found missing, torn off as he tried to climb a cedar tree, presumably to get a better view back toward the tent or to collect firewood from the higher branches. The cedar tree itself told a story. Branches were broken off up to 15 feet high, higher than a person could normally reach. It was as if someone had climbed in desperate panic, breaking off anything that could burn, trying to keep that pathetic little fire alive just a bit longer. A few dozen meters uphill, they found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov himself, along with Zina Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin. All 3 were positioned as if they'd been trying to crawl back to the tent, facing uphill, arms outstretched, frozen in their final desperate attempt to reach safety. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but it wasn't immediately clear if this was from a fall or something more sinister. So far, 5 bodies, all died of hypothermia, but that left 4 hikers unaccounted for. It took searchers another month to find them, and when they did, the mystery deepened into something truly horrifying. The remaining 4 bodies were discovered in May, after the snow had begun to melt. They were found in a makeshift snow cave far down the slope, huddled together in what appeared to be a final, desperate attempt to survive. But these weren't simple cases of freezing to death. These bodies told a story of violence that defied explanation. Let's hear what one of the rescue workers told investigators at the time.
2 of the women were missing their eyes. One, Lyudmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue. Nikolai Thibault Brignol's skull was crushed so severely that pieces of bone had been driven into his brain. Semyon Zolotaryov and Dubinina had multiple broken ribs and crushed chests. I have seen many accidents in the mountains, but never anything like this.
That sounds absolutely terrifying. The medical examiner described the injuries as consistent with a car crash or bomb blast, but there were no cars on that mountain and no evidence of explosives. Here's what made investigators scratch their heads. There were no external wounds, no cuts, no bruises on the skin. It was as if some massive internal force had crushed them from within, leaving their skin intact while pulverizing their internal organs. Could that really be the case? What kind of force could cause such devastating internal injuries without leaving a mark on the skin? And why were some of them wearing clothes that belonged to other hikers? Clothes that showed traces of radioactivity. Yes, you heard that right. Radioactivity, because apparently hypothermia and missing tongues weren't mysterious enough. The Soviet authorities launched a massive investigation. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed the evidence, brought in medical experts, and deployed teams of investigators to comb through every detail. For months, they worked the case. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov was a seasoned professional who'd handled hundreds of cases. He approached Dyatlov Pass with the methodical precision of a man who'd seen everything. And then, in May 1959, they closed the case with this official conclusion. The hikers died due to a compelling natural force. That's it. A compelling natural force, not avalanche, not animal attack, not equipment failure, just a vague, almost poetic phrase that explained absolutely nothing. It's like investigating a bank robbery and concluding that the money was taken by compelling financial circumstances. Technically true, but not exactly helpful. For decades, that vague phrase was all anyone had to go on. The case files were sealed, the investigation was classified, and the area was closed to hikers for 3 years. Because nothing says routine hiking accident quite like making an entire mountain off limits to the public. And naturally, this led to some truly wild theories. Let's start with what scientists think actually happened, because after all these years, they've got some pretty compelling ideas that don't involve aliens or secret government weapons. The leading theory, avalanche. Specifically, something called a slab avalanche. Here's how it might have worked. Strong katabatic winds, those are powerful downslope winds that can reach hurricane force, could have built up a heavy, unstable layer of snow above the campsite. Hours after the hikers went to sleep, this snow slab could have broken loose and hit their tent like a slow-moving freight train. Now, the avalanche didn't necessarily bury them completely, but imagine you're sleeping peacefully when suddenly your tent is hit by thousands of tons of moving snow. The pressure would be enormous, potentially causing those internal injuries found on the victims. You'd panic, grab whatever cutting tool you could find and slash your way out without thinking about boots or coats. In 2021, researchers at ETH Zurich actually ran computer simulations of this scenario. They used the same mathematical models that predict real avalanches and plugged in the exact conditions from that night in 1959. Their models showed that a delayed slab avalanche could have formed exactly as needed to explain the evidence. Let me share what one of the lead researchers had to say about their findings.
We concluded that while we can't prove this is what happened, an avalanche is now quantitatively consistent with all known facts. The mathematics work out, the physics make sense, but of course we cannot travel back in time to witness what actually occurred that night.
That scientists speak for, we think this is probably what killed them, but we can't be 100% certain. There's also the hypothermia angle. 6 of the 9 hikers died of hypothermia, which can cause something called paradoxical undressing. When you're severely hypothermic, your body's temperature regulation goes haywire. You actually feel intensely hot and start stripping off clothes, even though you're literally freezing to death. That would explain why so many bodies were found nearly naked. And then there's the infrasound theory. Some scientists think intense katabatic winds could have created low-frequency sound waves, a rumble below human hearing that can cause panic, disorientation, and even hallucinations. Maybe the hikers thought they were under attack by something monstrous when it was really just the mountain's own terrifying voice. Let's think about that for a second. Does that really add up? Would experienced mountaineers abandon their shelter because of weird sounds in the wind? But let's be honest, avalanche doesn't exactly capture the imagination, does it? And some of the evidence doesn't quite fit the neat scientific explanations. That's where the conspiracy theories come in. And boy, do they come in. 25 years after the incident, Colonel Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator who'd originally closed the case, gave a shocking interview. He claimed he'd been ordered to cover up the real cause of the hikers' deaths. He said there were floating balls of light reported in the sky that night, and evidence of some kind of heat weapon that had scorched nearby trees. UFO, secret Soviet laser weapons, experimental aircraft, take your pick. Because apparently, when you're dealing with a Soviet-era mystery, the answer is always either weather balloon or advanced alien technology. Then there's the military angle. Two of the hikers had military connections. Semyon Zolotaryov was a World War II veteran who'd fought in the Battle of Stalingrad. Alexander Kolevatov worked in nuclear cleanup. Some conspiracy theorists claim they were on a secret mission to meet CIA agents in the wilderness, a Cold War spy exchange gone wrong. Because obviously, what's a Soviet mystery without spies and secret missions? I mean, why would college students go hiking for fun when they could be carrying out covert operations in the middle of nowhere? And yes, there's even a Yeti theory. One of the hikers' last photographs showed a blurry figure standing behind a tree. Plus, their own joke newspaper mentioned Yetis in the northern Urals. Could a Sasquatch-like creature have attacked them? Look, I'm not saying any of these theories are true, but I am saying they're more interesting than avalanche and hypothermia. Though I'll admit blaming the Yeti is a pretty convenient way to explain away inconvenient evidence. Can't argue with Bigfoot. He's not exactly available for questioning. Here's what still bothers me about the official explanations, even the well-researched ones. If it was just an avalanche, why did all 9 hikers leave the tent? Even if the tent was damaged, it would still provide more shelter than the open wilderness. Experienced mountaineers would know that staying in whatever shelter they had was their best chance of survival. And why cut the tent? If an avalanche had hit, wouldn't the logical response be to dig out the entrance rather than slice through the fabric? These weren't panicked amateurs. They were skilled hikers who trained for emergencies. There's also the curious pattern of how the bodies were found. They weren't scattered randomly. They were grouped, 2 by the fire, 3 heading back to the tent, and 4 in the snow cave. It's almost like they'd made deliberate decisions about where to go and who to stay with. And how did they know to climb that specific cedar tree in the middle of a blizzard, in the dark? How did they locate a tree with branches high enough to break off for firewood? The radioactivity is another puzzle. Some of the clothing found on the last 4 bodies showed elevated radiation levels. Now, this was 1959, just a few years after extensive nuclear testing, so background radiation was higher than normal. But still, why were only certain pieces of clothing contaminated? There's also the curious fact that Soviet case files omit some medical information. Even the deputy prosecutor later admitted he was not allowed to mention certain details about the victim's internal organs. Makes you wonder what they found that they didn't want to share, doesn't it? In 2019, exactly 60 years after the incident, the Russian government officially reopened the Dyatlov Pass case. The Prosecutor General's office announced they would conduct a comprehensive investigation to finally solve the mystery. But here's the catch. They limited their investigation to just 3 possibilities: hurricane force, wind, avalanche, or slab avalanche. That's it. No UFOs, no secret weapons, no military cover-ups. Just weather-related explanations. It's like reopening the JFK assassination case, but only allowing investigators to consider theories involving lone gunmen named Lee Harvey Oswald. By July 2020, they declared a snow avalanche the most probable cause and closed the criminal investigation. Case closed. Mystery solved. Right? Well, not everyone's convinced. Richard Holmgren, a Swedish historian who actually retraced the hikers' route in 2017, points out several problems with the avalanche theory. Even the Russian medical examiners at the time had doubted an avalanche could explain the injuries. Let me share what Holmgren discovered on his expedition.
The slope where they camped was only about 30 degrees. pretty gentle for avalanche country. Most avalanches require slopes of 35 degrees or steeper. And here's the thing that really bothered me. When the searchers arrived in February, no one reported seeing fresh avalanche debris. Wouldn't tons of displaced snow leave some trace? I walked that exact route, and I just couldn't see it.
That's a compelling point. Could it really be that simple after all these years? So why does this case still fascinate us more than 60 years later? Why do we keep coming back to a hiking accident in the middle of nowhere? Maybe it's because the answers never feel complete. Even with all the scientific analysis and computer modeling, there's still that nagging feeling that something doesn't add up. The pieces fit, but the puzzle still looks wrong somehow. Or maybe it's because we love a good mystery. As one researcher put it, it will never get solved because we don't want it to get solved. The avalanche answer might be correct, but it's boring. We humans are drawn to the unexplained, like moths to a flame. There's something almost cinematic about the whole thing. The sublime Siberian wilderness, the locked-down Soviet backdrop, a group of young adventurers whose exciting trip turned into a nightmare. It has every ingredient of a thriller, except a satisfying ending. And then there's that haunting image that stays with you. A tent cut open from the inside and bare footprints leading away into the snow. It's like a scene from a horror movie, except it actually happened. The incident has inspired dozens of books, documentaries, and movies. There's even a video game. We've turned a real tragedy into entertainment, which says something about our fascination with the unknown. But maybe that's not entirely wrong. Maybe by keeping the story alive, we're honoring the memory of 9 young people who died doing what they loved. Maybe by continuing to ask questions, we're ensuring their story doesn't disappear into the vast silence of the mountains. Look, the avalanche theory probably is the right answer. The science is sound. The computer models work. It explains most of the evidence without requiring secret government conspiracies or visits from interdimensional beings. But most isn't all. And those unanswered questions keep whispering in the back of your mind. What really drew them out of the tent that night? Why did 9 experienced hikers make a decision that guaranteed their deaths? And why, after all these years of investigation, do we still feel like we're missing something crucial? The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened on Dead Mountain that February night in 1959. The mountain has kept its secrets for more than 6 decades, and it might keep them forever, but that's okay. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some questions are more valuable than their answers, and sometimes the most honest response to the unknown is simply to admit that we don't know everything. The world is full of stories like Dyatlov Pass, cases where the official explanation doesn't quite satisfy, where the evidence points in multiple directions, where the truth feels just out of reach. Maybe someday a new piece of evidence will surface. Maybe some hiker will find a camera or journal that was missed by the searchers. Maybe we'll finally get that definitive answer that puts all the theories to rest. But until then, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of those real-life mysteries that refuses to stay silent. It keeps drawing us back, keeps making us wonder, keeps reminding us that for all our scientific knowledge and technological prowess, there are still things in this world that we simply don't understand. And who knows? Maybe you're the one who'll finally solve it. The mountain is still there, still keeping its secrets. The wind still howls through the pass where 9 young people met their fate. And somewhere in that endless Siberian wilderness, the truth is waiting. Maybe the wind on Dead Mountain will carry these secrets forever. Or maybe someday, someone brave enough will finally learn to listen to what it's been trying to tell us all along. So, what do you think? Did it really happen? Or is it just another mystery? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because who knows, you may never see us again.